Rouge Radio. It's playoff time, Canada. How are you doing out there? My name is Tyler Bieber, the host of the CFL segment here on Rouge Radio. Big show tonight. Of course, the playoffs are coming up around the corner here. Sunday afternoon, first up, the East Division semifinal as the Hamilton Tiger Cats host the Montreal Alouettes at Guelph. And that kickoff there is at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Following that, of course, the big road to the West Final in Calgary. We've been talking about it the entire season. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, the BC Lions, the Calgary Stampeders. It starts Sunday afternoon in Regina at Mosaic Stadium, where the Saskatchewan Roughriders will host the BC Lions, 4:30 p.m., immediately following the conclusion of the East Division semifinal. And coming up here in a couple minutes, we're going to have one of those BC Lions, a member of that orange team out on the left coast in Vancouver, and that is the star running back of the team, Andrew Harris. And it's a special weekend for Andrew Harris, and here's why. He is an alum of the Vancouver Island Raiders, a junior team playing in the Canadian Junior Football League, and they are also in Saskatchewan this weekend and in Regina playing at Mosaic Stadium. They will take on the Regina Thunder on Saturday afternoon at Mosaic Stadium for the national championship, and the Raiders will go for their fourth title since 2006 when Andrew Harris won his first with the Raiders. He was a member of 3 championship winning teams with the Vancouver Island Raiders. We'll talk to him about the head coach at the time and still is the head coach of that great program out there on Vancouver Island, Matthew Snoop Blocker. We'll get to a couple other things. I'm going to ask him about his relationship with Jacques Chapdelaine. There's been a little bit, earlier in the season, there was a little bit of, he wasn't sure if the team had enough confidence in him to handle a huge amount of touches with the football because, you look at it, through the mid-season area and even earlier in the season, they just weren't getting him the ball enough, and that's when the BC Lions were struggling most. And, they'd win one game, they'd lose 2, or they'd win 2 and lose 2. They just didn't find anything consistent on offense. And now I think towards the end of the season here, you're starting to see it a little bit more. They beat the Calgary Stampeders. They did get blown out by the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but they had a very nice performance at home against the Edmonton Eskimos as well. And a 2-back set, and this really intrigues me because the second back is one that is familiar with what's coming up on Sunday afternoon, and that is Stephen Logan. 5 years ago, 2008, he dominated the Saskatchewan Roughriders defense as the BC Lions went into Regina with Buck Pierce at quarterback and defeated the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the West Division semifinal when the Riders were the clear-cut favorite early in the season. And then over the course of time, just like this season, they started to fade away and they couldn't get it back in time for that home playoff game. Now, there's different variables, of course, when you compare 2008 to 2013. I think Saskatchewan's defense has improved greatly over that time, as they should. That's 5 years ago, right? But maybe a little bit of similarity there. We'll see what Stephen Logan is able to do for the BC Lions. I think he's done a great job for them in the short amount of time that he's been with the team. And, he's brought an additional element. You know about Andrew Harris. You know what he can do. But Stephen Logan has brought in a perfect backup combination to Andrew Harris, and they play off each other so well. And it's such a dynamic force for that BC Lions offense. And we'll see if it's going to be Travis Lulay, Buck Pierce, or Thomas DeMarco starting at quarterback for the Lions. I don't think it'll be DeMarco personally. I don't see why they would go with DeMarco, the guy with the least amount of experience in a playoff game, in a playoff environment. They're expecting anywhere from, I believe, 37,000 to 40,000 people at Mosaic Stadium for the game. It's not going to be a sellout, but still a huge environment that you have to deal with in Regina when it comes to the Saskatchewan Roughriders fans. And BC's been there and done it. We'll see if they can do it again on Sunday. And we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to get Andrew Harris on the line, and then we're going to come right back. And we're going to talk to Andrew, as I mentioned, Vancouver Island Raiders, BC Lions, both in the province of Saskatchewan this upcoming weekend. Unfortunately, we're unable to hook up with Andrew Harris at this moment. We were told that he would be on a tight deadline, so we'll try again in a little bit here. But, there's lots to talk about, so we're going to get right to it. Earlier today, Division All-Stars were released for both the East and the West Division. Always an interesting time of year, and for a few different reasons. A, you only have so many slots to fill, right? So you get one quarterback, a couple running backs, a few receivers, one offensive lineman for each position, although you classify a left tackle and a right tackle both as a tackle, so you technically get two, and then, of course, your center. So you're a little bit short on talent, so it always creates room for debate as to who should be on the team, right? And so here it is. We're going to run through it here. You think about who you would pick. I'll pick out a couple of guys who I think, could create a little bit more of a, they may not be that kind of guy that you're going to pick, but we can explain why they were picked. So the East offense goes like this. At quarterback, you have Ricky Ray. The two running backs are C.J. Gable and Will Ford. Receivers are Andre Dury, Bakari Grant, S.J. Green, and Chad Owens. And then along that offensive line, you have Josh Bork, Glenn January, Chris Van Zyl, Greg White, and Jeff Keeping. Now, it's a little bit more interesting this season for picking a quarterback because, as you know, there's so many injuries, right? You had Ricky Ray, the East Division starting quarterback. He got hurt. Anthony Calvillo, sure-bound Hall of Famer, arguably the best quarterback of all time in the Canadian Football League. He got hurt. Winnipeg, you have the revolving window of quarterbacks there. Buck Pierce, who's now with the BC Lions, Max Hall, Justin Goltz, and Jason Boltus. Although we kind of, throw Jason Boltus out of the picture there. No slight to him. Max Hall was the clear quarterback when all was said and done with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But Ricky Ray being chosen over Henry Burris, who played a full 18-game schedule, is a little bit interesting to me, given the fact that Henry Burris didn't have a terrible season himself. And so when you're picking a guy like Ricky Ray who played half the season, you had to have the really good stats, right? Henry Burris was just short of 5,000 yards. But, when you look at the entire season, I think you pick out what Ricky Ray was able to do. And then perhaps the reason he is the starting quarterback is because then you gain that projection and you push it over the course of time and you create this big bulletin of stats. And while some people may say that this potential and this stat line, that the projection isn't, exactly right, I don't think anybody can really deny that Ricky Ray, if he would have stayed healthy, would have certainly been the East Division starting quarterback. And more than likely, although you got John Cornish, although you have Corey Sheets, Henry Burris was in the discussion too, the most outstanding player in the league. So there's that. Burris was 24 touchdowns, 19 interceptions on the season, 93.7 quarterback rating, 93.2 quarterback rating, which was the lowest since 2009 when he was with the Calgary Stampeders. But Ricky Ray, the quarterback there in the East, C.J. Gable, Will Ford, the running backs again. Injuries, they kind of took their toll. Toronto, Chad Kacker didn't play a full season. C.J. Gable, he started out a little bit slow, and then over the course of time, Hamilton started to use their running game more effectively. Of course, that benefited C.J. Gable, and he came out into the forefront. Will Ford of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Who would have thought that if you're going to have a Winnipeg Blue Bombers running back on the All-Star team, that it's going to be Will Ford? They had Chad Simpson there, but again, injuries deterred his season, and it was cut short for him. And then, of course, the Montreal Alouettes, you had Brandon Whitaker, who was hurt at the beginning of the season, came back, got hurt again, and it's been a revolving door with Jerome Messam, Tyrell Sutton, Tyrone Carrier's there. They just they haven't been able to find that consistent level to produce what would have been an all-star capable player. Not to say that they don't have the talent there, it's just that you don't have a guy that would beat out C.J. Gable or Will Ford when it comes to voting for an all-star team. On defense for the East, Bryant Turner and Khalif Mitchell were the defensive tackles. John Bowman and Brandon Boudreau, the defensive ends. Chip Cox, Robert McCune, and Enoch Mwamba, the linebackers. Jeff Tisdale, Patrick Watkins were the corners. Gerald Brown and Billy Parker were the halfbacks. And Mike Edom is the safety, and he's a rookie. Not a bad season when you're a rookie and you're an all-star, hey? So kudos to Mike Edom, a product of the University of Calgary Dinos, who will take on the Manitoba Bison for the Hardy Cup. And we're going to have the SportsEh guys talking about that one in about 30 minutes or so coming up. Special teams, Sean White was the kicker. Josh Bartell of the Hamilton Ticats, the punter. And also of the Ticats was Mark Beswick. He's the special teams guy. And that can be, I believe, a returner or a special teams cover guy, which Mark Beswick is. So you flip it over to the West now. And I think you start to see a little bit more sense, because these are little guys that were able to stay healthy and were able to produce a little bit more in terms of stats than their East counterparts. And at quarterback, you had Darian Durant. Again, he didn't have a fully healthy season. Mike Riley was the healthiest quarterback in the West Division, although, there was the whole concussion thing and whatnot with the Edmonton Eskimos, and whether he should have played in a game or two or not, but he did play the full season. You had the revolving door in Calgary, although they are still the first team in the West. They had Kevin Glenn, Drew Tate, and Bo Levi Mitchell. Fantastic trio of quarterbacks in Calgary there. And then BC Lions, again, you had Travis Lulay. He eventually got hurt. Thomas DeMarco came in for a few games. Buck Pierce had a little bit of time with the BC Lions, but ultimately you go back and you look at the big picture, and again, you're probably looking at Darian Durant or Mike Riley, and you can make a case for either. I mean, Mike Riley had a fantastic season, despite when you look at the record, he still had a very fine first season with the Edmonton Eskimos, and we talked about it with him last week. You have Fred Stamps there. You have a Darius Bowman. Shamad Chambers is up and coming. Gary Koch was injured. I mean, you have all this plethora of talent when you talk about the Edmonton Eskimos, and going forward, they're going to be set up very well offensively if they can get some stability and some proper leadership in the locker room to maintain a consistent level of play. And of course, earlier, Kavis Reed on Monday, November 4th, was fired by the Edmonton Eskimos as their head coach. And so they begin a new search and look for a new sideline boss out there in Edmonton, and we'll see where that search comes up. Some are saying it's Rick Campbell, the son of former Eskimos legend Hugh Campbell. That's the hot rumor. There's no guarantee that it's going to happen, but it's looking like perhaps that's the guy that they've been looking at for the longest time now. And the Edmonton Eskimos, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers potentially, Jim Burke hasn't been let go yet. You have the Montreal Alouettes, again, potentially. We're assuming that Jim Popp isn't going to return to the sidelines and he's going to revert back to his general manager position, which I believe he has said before when he took over the job earlier, a few years ago, 2007. And I'm guessing it's going to be the same thing, that he won't want to be the head coach. He'll want to go back to his general manager duty and find a new guy to run the team on the sideline. And, of course, Ottawa. The Ottawa Red Blacks are coming into the league, and I believe there was a report that Paul LaPolice, former Winnipeg Blue Bombers head coach, interviewed for that position. And supposedly a very strong interview. So could it be Paul LaPolice being the head coach with the Ottawa Red Blacks? Some are saying, since Ottawa has been coming back into the league for the longest amount of time, or it has been known for the longest amount of time, that you look at a guy like Paul LaPolice, and people have been saying it's going to be Paul LaPolice for the longest time. I mean, now, of course, that's just speculation, but I mean, it makes more than enough sense for the Ottawa Red Blacks. He's a young head coach. He's an offensive guy. He can instill his philosophies right away. You got CFL-ready talent to pick up the offense, to pick up the schemes, and you're ready to go right away. And I've said it time and time again, this Ottawa Red Blacks team is going to be set up so much better than the Ottawa Renegades were 11 years ago when they first came into the league. You go back, go on Wikipedia or whatnot, or put it on Google and see where you can come up with it. The Ottawa expansion draft from 2002. Look at the names. Do you even recognize any of those guys? More than likely, you're only going to pick out one or two, maybe three guys, if you follow the league very closely, that you're going to recognize and say, hey, yeah, he's a pretty good player. The fact is, the Ottawa Renegades had a very poor talent pool to pick from, and because of that, they were slow to get off on the ground. They couldn't produce any wins, and of course, when you can't win games, your fan base isn't there. And that's how they failed. And now you look at what's going to happen upcoming here in January and February and moving on towards next June when the 2014 CFL season starts. You look at this roster that the Ottawa Red Blacks are going to be able to pick from, and you say, wow, that's not a bad team. You only can protect so many players for the 8 other CFL teams. And that's why this 2013 CFL season was a perfect lead into the offseason for the Ottawa Red Blacks. I mean, you never want to see injuries happen. But if there was a more perfect time for the injuries to happen for the Ottawa Red Blacks, it was this season. I mean, you count how many key guys went down and how many guys stepped up into their place and made their mark on the league. It is phenomenal. We've talked about it before. You had the quarterbacks, Kevin Glenn, Bo Levi Mitchell, Drew Tate, Drew Willie, Darian Durant, Mike Riley, Jonathan Crompton got some playing time with the Edmonton Eskimos, Thomas DeMarco, Buck Pierce out there in BC, Travis Lulay's there, of course. You have the debate. Are the Toronto Argonauts going to protect Ricky Ray? Or are they going to protect Zach Collaros? Trevor Harris has showed some poise in the past. The Hamilton Tiger Cats, Henry Burris, I believe, is a free agent this upcoming offseason. They have Dan Lefevre, who I am very high on as a backup quarterback in Hamilton, and I think he could even get a look for the Ottawa Red Blacks. You move over to Montreal, and Troy Smith is starting to show his stuff. They have Josh Nieswander there. Tanner Marsh is there. Those guys haven't been at the level that Troy Smith has been, I don't think. But, you still look at them, and they've produced some wins, and they've produced some results for the Montreal Alouettes, so you have to take a look. And, of course, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, despite their record of 3-15, Max Hall, I said it last week, I'll say it again, he played very well for them in the back end of this season, and I think he's going to have a good chance to go into camp as a starting quarterback if the new group, assuming there is a new group, elects to keep him. And I don't see why you wouldn't. I mean, he provided some stable leadership for them as you went down the stretch. No, they didn't win very many games, but he still produced results that you hadn't seen from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers all season. And, maybe if they had a little bit more of that earlier in the season, they would have a few more wins. They would have been competing with the Montreal Alouettes, with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Maybe they could have stuck their foot in the door and slid into third place in the East Division. But you didn't see that because it looked like they didn't care. But Max Hall, I think, brought some leadership to that team down the stretch. And you look back maybe and think, well, where was this? Where was this earlier when we really needed it? But that wasn't the case for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Continuing with the West Division. Weston Dressler, Chris Getzlaff, Marquay McDaniel, and Fred Stamps were the West Division All-Stars at receiver. Stanley Bryant and Jovan Olafioye, the tackles. Brendan Labatt, John Gott, the guards. And another rookie here, Brett Jones of the Calgary Stampeders from the University of Regina, the starting center for the West Division All-Star team. And I mean, I say starting, but of course there is no actual All-Star game. This is just what it would look like if All-Stars were picked and there actually was an All-Star game. A Pro Bowl type thing, if you will, when you compare it to the National Football League. On defense, Terrius George, Almondo Sewell were the defensive tackles, Alex Hall and Charleston Hughes the defensive ends. And you look at that and you say, well, wasn't Alex Hall with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for the majority of the season? And he was. But once he got traded from the East Division, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, to the West Division and the Saskatchewan Roughriders, his stats for the All-Star, for the awards, everything like that, revert over to the West Division, and so he becomes a West Division All-Star now, which is a little bit unfortunate because the other Calgary Stampeder defensive end, Cordero Law, had a huge season for the Calgary Stampeders, and then you look at other guys like John Chick, Ricky Foley of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, guys that, maybe would have got in that spot if Alex Hall was still with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but of course he's not, and so he got the nod there for the West Division, and rightly deserved. He should be an All-Star, whether it's the East or the West, because he had a fantastic season no matter where he had played. Adam Bighill, Solomon Elamimian of the BC Lions, both in at linebacker, joined by Jawan Simpson of the Calgary Stampeders. This defensive back crew is dominated by the BC Lions. You had Cord Parks and Dante Marsh at the corners, Ryan Phillips at the half, and Saskatchewan Roughriders' Dwight Anderson is at the other half. Safety is Tyrone Brackenridge of the Riders, and then a clean sweep of the special teams for the Calgary Stampeders, Rene Paredes, Rob Maver, and Larry Taylor, the special teams guy. Rob Maver, I think, was the proper selection for the punter. Some argue Zach Schmidt of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I think when you look at it overall, Rob Maver, one of the best, if not the best, punter in the league at pinning the team deep, not punting it into the end zone for a single. I mean, it's nice to have points, right? But you also play for that field position, and Rob Maver gave them a great shot to do so. So, the playoffs, eh? Are you excited? I'm excited. Couldn't be more excited, actually. First time in a long time, actually, that I'm really fired up. I mean, you had the 100th Grey Cup last year, and as great as that was, and it turned out to be, and you had the 99th Grey Cup, and you go back and forth. This 101st Grey Cup playoffs, to me, is the most exciting playoffs that's going to happen in a long time. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Of course, the Hamilton Tiger Cats start out against the Montreal Alouettes. They played twice down the stretch. Each team won a game. And now here they go again for the Eastern Division semifinal and the right to play the Toronto Argonauts. And you look at the game, and you think that perhaps the Hamilton Tiger Cats have it in the bag. You know, Montreal lost Anthony Calvillo. They've lost Jamel Richardson. They've had some injuries. But that defense, I am telling you right now, that defense could, I'm not saying they're going to, but I'm going to say could get them to Regina and the Grey Cup. This defense is made for the playoffs. And if they can get a consistent product on the field out of their offense, Troy Smith, if he can bring it at the quarterback position, the Montreal Alouettes are a huge team to look at here when it comes to the playoffs. A huge team. You got to keep the ball in your hands. Don't turn it over. And I think the Montreal Alouettes could defeat the Hamilton Tiger Cats if that is the case. Not just could, will defeat the Hamilton Tiger Cats if that is the case. And then you look at the Ticats. And while he is still Henry Burris, he has been struggling a little bit on the field, I think anyways. 24 touchdown passes this season. He had 4 touchdown passes since September 13th against the Calgary Stampeders. He had 2 in that game. Ever since, he's only had 4. That's 7 games. He's had 4 touchdown passes total. 5 games in which he did not throw a touchdown pass. And while they still have won games, they're 5-2 over the course of that period of time. I do believe that could be an issue here. And I'll tell you why. I am a big believer in running the football when it comes to the playoffs. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, you try and extend the game, you try and slow it down, keep your offense on the field, limit the possessions of the other team, no matter who it is, whether it's Troy Smith, whether it's Ricky Ray, Darian Durant, Travis Lulay, Henry Burris, Kevin Glenn. Doesn't matter which of these 6 quarterbacks you have on the other side of the field. You slow the game down, you keep your offense on the field, keep the ball away from the other team, and grind out drives to get in the end zone. And I think you do that by running the football, or if you don't want to run the football, you have the screens, you have the swing passes, the high percentage plays that move the football, but don't move the football quickly. And then when the time comes, maybe you look at stretching the field a little bit, you push the pace, as the Hamilton Tiger Cats, I think, do the best, or maybe the second best, 1 or 2 in the CFL in pushing the football down the field with Henry Burris. I think they have a great quick offense, and that can be very dangerous when it comes to the playoffs. But the second reason, it's cold, and it's easy to say that. It's cold, so run the football. Of course, defenses can stop the run, no matter what the temperature is, obviously. But when it's this time of year, you have this kind of weather, you run the football to try and wear down that defense and grind them into the ground. As I said, to extend your drive. Keep your team on the field. Keep your defense on the sideline breathing. Nice and easy. You know? And, of course, turnovers come in huge into that thing. And getting back to the running game here, C.J. Gable, all-star in the East at running back. But they don't give him the football. And it boggles my mind as to why they didn't give him the football more down the stretch. Now, again, they were 5-2. They won. So, you know, it's really tough to question a team that's winning by the way they're winning when they're winning. Now, I mentioned this before. When they played the Montreal Alouettes this season, Montreal does have, statistically, the best rush defense in the league, 82 yards per game against. That is absolutely excellent when you're talking about running the football. 12 carries is all C.J. Gable got in 3 games. That's 4 per game. And in the last 2 games, he had 5 total for -1 yard. That's not going to cut it in the playoffs. You got to move the football on the ground. They were able to do it with Siobhan Walker last week against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He had over 100 yards, but again, it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's not the league's top rushing defense, the Montreal Alouettes. And you saw it in the last game they played. They used the third-string quarterback, Jeremiah Masoli, in a certain package where he would run the football, the read option, because I don't think Henry Burse is capable of doing it too well at his age anymore. A few years ago, Henry Burse would run this type of offense, and he would absolutely smoke you into the ground. That was the quarterback that he was. You know, he had 500 yards, 3 straight seasons with the Calgary Stampeders, including their Grey Cup season in 2008. That was who Henry Burse was. He would beat you deep with his arm. He would throw 30 touchdown passes every single season. And he would beat you on the ground. But he's not that quarterback anymore. So you bring in Jeremiah Masoli, switch things up a little bit, get a little bit of a different look, and try and move the football in that way. And you saw it with Dan Lefevre earlier this season, too. Against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, he had some big plays. Against other teams, he had big plays, too, running the football. And that's probably the kind of thing that you're going to see with the Hamilton Tiger Cats on Sunday afternoon. But I still think they have to get C.J. Gable the ball. Or Siobhan Walker, if they have Siobhan Walker in the game too. Whoever it may be. You know, they beat the Montreal Alouettes with different kind of running attacks. Jeremiah Masoli. Brandon Banks had an end around. He had a huge play on an end around. I think it was a touchdown. I can't quite remember, but I know it was a huge play at the very least. They beat Montreal by getting creative. Now Montreal is going to be prepared for that. So are you going to try and run the football now? And try and run it down the throat of that stiffened up and tough defense. We'll see what happens. But after thinking about it, this is the one that I've gone back and forth on the most out of any pick I was contemplating. And I am going to roll with the Montreal Alouettes on the road to win this East Division semifinal and go to Toronto to play the Argonauts. And we'll call it... Well, 27-19, the final score for the Montreal Alouettes. Of course, the other game, Sunday afternoon, the West Division semifinal, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the BC Lions. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the Saskatchewan Roughriders and their offense just because we went through that thoroughly last week, and you can check that out. Check out last week's podcast, last Wednesday's show, if you want to hear my opinion on what the Saskatchewan Roughriders may need to do or why they have been struggling to move the football on offense. The BC Lions, you know, I mentioned it earlier. I really like this dual threat that they have with Stephon Logan and Andrew Harris at the running back position. I think it brings up a great change of pace. And I mentioned that Stephon Logan ripped this defense apart in 2008. And, of course, it did change significantly, so you can't directly compare it. But when you see what Stephon Logan was able to do to the Calgary Stampeders, although there were a few backups in the game, and what he did to the Edmonton Eskimos, you look at this BC Lions offense and you think, do they have it figured out? I mean, I haven't been the biggest supporter of Jacques Chapdelaine and his offense over the course of time with the BC Lions or even with the Edmonton Eskimos when he was there, but I think he may have started to figure something out here with the BC Lions. And if he has, that defense can ride him a long way. Because while they are aging, they will bring it and bring it hard. And we've seen Darian Durant struggle to play against this BC Lions defense. They did beat up on him a couple weeks ago, but that was hugely turnover generated. 7 turnovers, in fact, the BC Lions had in that game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So, I think BC is set up well here. I do. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are playing at home. Yes, they have the Grey Cup in their backyard in Regina on November 24th. But I really like the potential for the BC Lions here to have a huge upset, to send the Saskatchewan Roughriders packing early and rolling on towards the Grey Cup in Regina. And, of course, they have to go to Calgary first in the West Final. But I really like them in this spot. And I am going to take the BC Lions. I'm going to go with both road teams here. Could be a little bit of a risky and bad decision by me taking road teams in the playoffs. But I think if you're going to win on the road, it's going to send you forward. And I like the BC Lions on the road. I like the Montreal Alouettes on the road. I'm going to take the BC Lions to beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And we're going to go with, I would expect a bit of a lower scoring game. Even when BC turned the ball over 7 times, Saskatchewan only got into the 30s, which is still a lot. But we'll go 21 to, we'll keep it close, 21-17 BC Lions over the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the West Division semifinal. And so that's going to wrap it up for me. Roll towards the playoffs here Sunday. Again, don't miss it. I don't know why you would miss it. I don't know why you would forget. It's the playoffs. But sometimes I forget things quite easily too. And so we'll remind you, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, Montreal Alouettes at the Hamilton Tiger Cats. 4:30 p.m. Eastern, the BC Lions and the Saskatchewan Roughriders, a heavyweight West Division showdown following that East Division game. And that's going to do it for the CFL segment here on Rouge Radio. Going to wrap it up again. Mentioned it last week. We're going to remind you again, because I think this is going to be such a fantastic event at the Grey Cup during the Grey Cup week. Speaking of that, though, if you want to check out some of my work, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I'm very excited about this project, and it's with the CFL, with the CFL.ca website there. I'm going to be contributing a daily blog for them. They do some great work on CFL.ca. I'm very much looking forward to working with these guys. Got to see them a little bit in 2011 and what they do at the Vancouver Grey Cup, the 99th Grey Cup in 2011. But going to be working extensively with them this time around, and very much looking forward to that. But the event I wanted to talk about again, the first ever, the inaugural Canadian Football Hall of Fame party, coming up Friday, November 22nd, in Regina. Going to be a fantastic event. Tickets go for $100 plus taxes. They include hors d'oeuvres, a little bit of food, and an open bar. How could you not respond like that to an open bar? That's fantastic hospitality from the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Again, $100 tickets plus taxes. Going to be a great night. Hall of Fame honoring the 2014 induction class. It's going to get announced that night. Some of the guys going to be in attendance there: Don Narcisse, Bobby Jurison, Dave Cutler, Gord Curry, George Reed, Roger Aldig, Damon Allen, and Ron Este. There will be a ton more at that event. So if you wanna be there, I'll be there. These great legends of the past are going to be there. Be sure to check that out. Canadian Football Hall of Fame website is where you can go for more details, more information. That's www.cfhof.ca. CFHOF.ca. Follow them on Twitter at CFHOF, Canadian Football Hall of Fame. I'm out. Please join me next Wednesday. We'll have a preview of the West Division Final, the East Division Final, a little bit of a recap of the Division semifinals. We're going to turn the ball over here. I'm going to hand it off, if you will, to the guys from SportsEh. A huge week upcoming here in the CIS, a huge week in Canadian football in general. The Vancouver Island Raiders and the Regina Thunder for the National Championship in Regina Saturday afternoon. Check that one out. I'm sure you can find it online somewhere if you're not in Regina. And, of course, the run towards the Vanier Cup, the conference finals coming up here this weekend. SportsEh guys, Patrick Yan, James Katsuras, Zechary Miller, going to bring it to you hard and heavy coming up here for the next, say about 26, 27 minutes, somewhere in there. Stay tuned. CIS show. My name is Tyler Bieber, the host of the CFL segment here on Rouge Radio. Thank you for joining me.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome back to SportsEh's weekly roundup of all the action in CIS football. This week, we'll be reviewing the playoff games held last weekend, as well as looking forward to the conference matchups. Joining me, as always, is SportsEh CEO and former Toronto Varsity Blues offensive guard Patrick Yan, as well as Zechary Miller, the SportsEh VP and former wide receiver for the McGill Redmen. We'll be covering all the playoff action in the CIS from last week and this upcoming weekend. We're going to talk about potential previews for the UTEC and Mitchell Bowls, and we'll talk about the recently announced OUA, RSEQ, and Canada West All-Star teams, and if there were any snubs or undeserving selections. So we'll get the ball rolling with our weekly CIS predictions for the playoffs and former records for picks. Last week, Zach and Pat set the standard by going 6-1, and I, of course, trailed them by going 5-2. Pat is smiling at me right now. I guess the only question I have is to Zach, and that's how could you possibly call the Mounties to upset Acadia, but then bungle the Montreal and Bishops game?
Well, the Mounties have Jordan Botel, and he's just been amazing the last 4 or 5 weeks, rushing for 100 yards, over 100 yards in every game. Obviously, he did it again against Acadia, and even though their offense wasn't strong, they still pulled out the game, and I figured that he would be the difference. And then Bishops, I just thought the home field advantage would really give them a boost. Obviously, it had no effect, and that was just a terrible pick.
Mount Allison was horrible last week. They shouldn't have won. The fact that Acadia lost to them means that there should have been no winner in the game whatsoever, James. No winner in the game at all. Like, Mount Allison's star running back, Jordan Botel, he averaged 3.8 yards on 24 carries. I can't even do the math on that because I'm so upset that Mount Allison actually won.
Okay, well, this brings up a bigger discussion, which we don't have time to have today, or maybe we can touch on it just a bit, of whether the AUS should have one automatic pick going to the UTEC Bowl. But what we have is a playoff scenario where we have an unlikely team in Mount Allison who's going to face off the the conference winner, St. Mary's, in the Loney Bowl. So I want you guys to break this matchup down for me. And who do you have coming out of the Atlantic to face whoever wins in the Quebec Conference?
Well, I feel sorry for whoever does come out of that conference, honestly. But in this game, Mount Allison has been St. Mary's twice this year. And like I said, Jordan Botel, if he can run the ball, even if he's averaging 3 yards a carry, give him the ball 30 times in that game, he's bound to get you over 100 yards, hopefully. And St. Mary's defense has looked good, but their offense has been very inconsistent as well. So this is going to be a game of, who has luck, I think, in the end, which way the ball bounces. I think Mount Allison might actually pull this off, and then the next week might look a little ugly for them, playing Laval probably.
I'm going to have to go with SMU on this one, and the reason being is because I have not picked Mount Allison, and I refuse to. They should not win this game. If they do, they'll either be facing Laval or Montreal, and you could see a RSEQ team dominating an AUS team on November 16th, and you really couldn't pay me to watch this game because it's just going to be hard to watch.
I have to agree with Pat on this one. I got to take St. Mary's. I do think that Jordan Botel is a big X factor for the Mounties, but at the end of the day, they weren't impressive enough to me against an Acadia team that St. Mary's has beaten 3 times already this year. So I think they will have the upper hand at home. But I do agree with you, Zach, that it is going to be painful to watch them play whoever wins in the Quebec. Speaking of Quebec, the Dunsmore Cup is this weekend, pitting the matchup that we all wanted to see, Laval against Montreal. You spoke a bit about Montreal against Bishops last week, Zach. Bishops was, surprise 6-2, but I guess in the playoffs when the weather gets cold, Montreal got it done. They had, great performance from the running backs, Sean Thomas, Manuel Crécy, and I don't really think we need to talk about Laval. I think everybody expected them to be Sherbrooke. So we have this big, colossal matchup here, and the winner's likely going to be in the Vanier because they're going to be facing the AUS winner. So, Pat, who do you think has the upper hand in this game?
I'm going to have to go with, I don't know, James. I really don't. I think you're going to have to check SportsEh.ca for my pick on this one.
Wow, Pat holding back on his prediction on our show here. Adding a little suspense. Let's see if Zach has the wherewithal to make his pick.
Well, I don't know. This has been a rivalry growing for the past few years. Montreal, and Laval have been in the finals for the last few years, and it's always been a great matchup. This year they've had a couple of good games. Montreal showcased their offense last week against Bishops, putting up over 50 points. But going into the game against Laval, they'll be playing at Pep Stadium, which is a very hostile environment for anyone that's ever played there. And the thing is, Laval has been a great second-half team. They come out of half and score points. So Laval has the upper hand, but I think I'm going to have to go with Montreal.
Pat, is there any way I can get an answer out of you?
I don't think so, James. You're going to have to check SportsEh.ca when we get our pick out this week.
Okay, so our CEO is going to leave everyone in suspense for this one. I am going to go with Laval, and really there's not much doubt in my mind. Montreal's a great team, and, it's going to be a defensive battle, but you can't pick against Laval this time of year. They've just proven time and time again that they're the top team. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to Canada West now, and what a conference, and what a weekend of playoff action. We had 2 conference semifinal games that literally went down to the wire. Unbelievable. You have Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Manitoba wins by 1, and then UBC looks like they're going to pull off the upset. They jump up to 17-0 lead against Calgary, but they end up losing 42-28. So is there anything you guys want to talk to me about those 2 games? Let's start with Saskatchewan.
Well, I think the way Calgary was able to move the ball passing in the snow, I've never seen that in my life, and that's awesome. So the way they were throwing the ball, the way they were managing the game with short passes to Mercer Timmins because they're stacking the box, it was almost like the coaches won that game for them in the second half.
Not very surprising either when you have Blake Mill as your play caller. What about you, Zach? What do you think? What stood out to you between the 2 semifinal games?
Well, the UBC game, the weather was just terrible, and that, I think, played maybe into Calgary's favor a bit. They're used to playing in that snow. And UBC, Deschamps was running the ball really hard, and he scored a touchdown late to bring the game back. And
I think the snow helped them. I think the snow helped them, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think either way, Deschamps would have ran the ball through Calgary's D-line. He's just a great runner. And the thing is, Calgary came back and pulled out the game, which shows that they have that, they have that extra bit of, intangible, if you want to call it. They have that. And they have the experience, even though they're a young team, and they know how to win.
Okay, so we have 2 teams in the final that are clearly battle-tested based on last weekend. Calgary, of course, Timmins had 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. Manitoba Coombs only had 48 yards, a touchdown, but then Nick Dembski had 115 and 3 touchdowns, so he clearly stole the show for him. So we have a battle of maybe the 2 top running backs in the Canada West. Well, they were chosen the All-Stars, so they must be. And it's going to be tough to call. Pat, are we going to get an answer out of you on this one? Or
I think no. I think you're going to have to check SportsEh.ca for this one as well.
Wow, Pat really pulling a fast one on us here. I guess we're going to have to go to Zach.
Well, since Pat can't seem to make up his mind, I'm going to have to go with Calgary. They're just a team to beat out west. Mercer Timmins is a workhorse. They have a bunch of offensive weapons, but at the same time, their defense is going to have to contain Coombs, Yance, and Dembski. if it snows again like it did last week, it might be in Calgary's favor again. Manitoba plays indoors. They're much more heavy on the passing game, which is going to be harder. But Manitoba's defense will have to tighten up and really be able to stop Calgary from getting to the end zone if they want a chance to win this game.
Who do you think is going to be the biggest X factor in this game?
The biggest X factor, I think, is going to be the weather.
Wow.
That's deep.
Yeah.
That's deep. I guess he's compensating for the fact that Pat's not giving us any answers here.
SportsEh.ca. SportsEh.ca.
There you have it, folks. As far as I'm concerned, it's one that's going to be really, really tough to call. But again, I know I'm picking favorites here, but I got to go with Calgary. I think the weather favors the bowling ball that is Mercer Timmins. Buckley has proven that he can get it done in the clutch. They have great veteran receivers. They have a great defense, a great O-line. They have it all. And I know Manitoba has Coombs, and I know they have Dembski, and I know Jordan Yance has had a phenomenal year. But I don't think their defense is going to be able to stop Timmins and company. So
but let's talk about Coombs for a second. How did he do last week, James?
He got shut down, but then how did Dembski do?
Well, yeah, I think you're right on that one. I think you're right on that one, James.
But again, I guess we're going to have to get more of your explanation on the site for that one. So we'll just have to wait for that. Okay, so that does it for the Canada West, and now we'll move on to the remaining conference, the OUA. And we had a couple of not too close games last week at all, to put it lightly. Queens finally got rid of their demons, even though they beat Guelph earlier in the year. But in the playoffs to get it done against the team that knocked them off twice last year, they got it done. They thrashed Guelph pretty much. And then Western, of course, to no one's surprise, blew out McMaster. But going into this game, there might be some injury issues. So let's see if that plays into either of your predictions. Pat, who do you have in this game?
I got to go with Western. And it kills me. Because I want to go with Queens. I've been a big supporter of Queens the entire season. I think they have one of the best DB corps in the CIS, if not the best. But there's just something about the Western Mustangs this year that makes me think that they're going to keep on rolling and nothing's going to really slow them down, because we talk about their offense all the time, James. Like we talk about Brian Marshall, George Johnson, Will Finch. He's like the poster boy for the CIS right now. But what about their defense? Like, their defense scores. Their defense does a lot. And I think they're a bit underappreciated because, obviously, offense sells tickets and defense wins championships. So I think with their defense, they'll be able to do it all the way to the venue this year.
Zach, Western and Queens, does it get any better than that?
I don't think so. It's a great matchup. The game earlier this year obviously went in Western's favor. But I think if Queens, their defense adjusts a bit to how they played last game, the game will be a lot closer. But I think Western's going to take it. They've been the standard in the OUA all year. Even if they have injuries at running back, I think, honestly, anyone can run behind that massive O-line.
Did you see that fourth-string kid that came out there at the end of the game, and he was just running for like 10 yards, 5 yards, like just big chunks? Because that hole made by that offensive line is so big, anyone could run through it.
To be fair, though, that was a defeated McMaster team at that point, and you know Queens is not going to let just anybody run for 10 yards on them, let alone a Yannick Haru or whoever else.
And the interesting thing about Haru is at the end of the game, you saw his body get twisted up in a weird way. Who knows? Who knows if he's going to play? Who knows if St. Clair's going to play? Who knows if San Vito has his cast off yet? No one really knows right now. So let's wait until game day and let's see who's on the sidelines.
Do you have anything else to add to that, Zach?
I think if you talk about Will Finch's ability to run the ball, that's going to be a huge difference in this game. He can throw, but he also can move the ball with his feet. And I think if Queens can try and contain him and not let him get out of the pocket and get those first downs with his legs, they'll have a better shot. But I just think Western's too much.
It's crazy because you're watching Finch and he looks unstoppable. He runs, he passes at his own will. But my main concern is that we might see Finch gets hurt if he keeps on running like Tim Tebow.
As far as I'm concerned, we've talked mostly about Will Finch, and deservedly so. He's had an unbelievable season. But one thing that gets lost in the shuffle, and I'll talk more about this in the Come On Man segment, is Billy McPhee. He's been criticized throughout his career for not putting up the numbers that he has the talent to put up, and justifiably so. But this year, go look at his numbers. Look how little interceptions he has, which is less than anyone who's thrown for as many touchdowns as he has. He brought up his completion percentage. He doesn't throw for as many yards per game, but then again, he doesn't have to. I think we can see what we finally wanted to see from Billy McPhee this year. I think he took Queens to a 7-1 record. He has great numbers. He finally silenced his critics as far as I'm concerned, myself included. And I think this game will, if he gets it done, will solidify him as an OUA great. I think it's his platform to do it. And another thing to point out is Ryan Granberg. He was injured last year because they ran him into the ground during the season, and then he wasn't healthy in the playoffs. Whereas this year, they had the luxury of resting him because they had Heslop, because they had Jesse Andrews, they had Yona Pataki, the rookie. So he's fresher than he's ever been. Look at the game against Guelph, 113 yards, 2 touchdowns. So
he was dominating them. He was averaging over 5 a carry. So it was pretty impressive against a defense that some said was one of the best in the CIS. So let's take that into account.
Also, you look at the other guys that get the ball to run, and Heslop. I think he's one of the most underrated running backs in the OUA. He runs really hard, and he has a lot of talent to break those big runs. You've seen him break 70, 80-yard runs on a consistent basis, and he did it against Western. They're a very dangerous running back group there at Queens as well.
And the thing with Western, of course, is as talented as they are at running back and as good as their O-line is, it's starting to wear a little thin when, with all those injuries adding up. Hopefully, Haru is healthy because he's a very important player for them. He had a great game. He had 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. So they're going to need him at full health unless they want Will Finch to just carry the team on his back, which he's capable of doing. But I guess we'll see. It'll be a great game. Okay, so what that leads us to now is the potential CIS semifinal matchups. We'll start, of course, with the OUA against Canada West crossover in the Mitchell Bowl. I guess, I don't know, at this point it's going to be tough to predict, but what this actually leads me to is, do you guys feel that it's fair for the AUS to have that one team that gets the straight bye to their conference final and then a one-game chance to make the Vanier Cup, whereas you only have one OUA team, one RCQ team, one Canada West team making it, when sometimes 2 of them are better, 3 of them are better than any AUS team, presumably?
I think it kind of is what it is, and I think they kind of have to deal with that. Everyone has to deal with it. There's no point in crying about it because it's not going to change. That's just the way it makes sense for the teams to play against each other and not do cross-conference games. I don't know, James. I feel like it is a advantage that every team out there has that they have to capitalize on, and to see it so uncompetitive this year it's disheartening because it's taking part of the competitive nature of the CIS out.
And just touching on what Patrick has said, he said competitiveness. That's something that I think the CIS is going to have to deal with because you can't just have a conference that is so uncompetitive. And a team that has lost to some of the bottom feeder teams in that conference, only 4 teams, but St. Mary's has lost to Mount Allison twice, and they get a bye all the way to the finals of the conference. It's ridiculous to me, and I think the CIS is going to have to find a way to, make a better setup, have a wild card, something like that. But I don't think this type of playoff will last too much longer. It's not the fairest way to do it, I don't think.
Okay, fair enough, guys. So now we're just going to jump right into a special segment of Come On Man. In light of the OUA, RSCQ, and Canada West All-Star teams being announced today, actually, we're going to go around the table and we're going to announce our biggest snubs or least deserving selections from the All-Star team. So we'll start off with Pat. Pat, who's your selection for Come On Man?
I got Daryl Watt, who's the first team OUA All-Star, with 21 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Don't get me wrong, he's a great player. Teams need to double team him. Team needs to account for him. He plays end, he plays tackle, he plays everything. But he's got 2.5 sacks. Okay? Ty Pham, who plays for Windsor as an interior defensive lineman, he lines up a bit everywhere, and he's got 7.5 sacks, 19.5 tackles, and 9 tackles for a loss. Daryl Watt has 2.5 sacks and 21 tackles, and the fact that he's the first team OUA All-Star and Ty Pham is a second-team OUA All-Star, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Come on, man.
I completely understand your logic. I'm just going to play devil's advocate a bit with you, though, and it's something that you already mentioned. But numbers don't tell the whole story, especially when it comes to defense. Daryl Watt is one of the most versatile and indispensable defensive players. We've watched him live. We see how much other teams have to account for him. I know that Ty Pham got snubbed last year, definitely. So, you know what I mean? I would have liked to have seen him get a first team this year. His numbers last year were just as good. His numbers this year are good. He deserves it. But I don't think, in spite of Daryl Watt, I don't think Watt should be removed from the first team because that's a guy that teams go in game planning around.
I mean, hey, if you're going to list him there, list him as an end, you know? List him as a 3-tech or something else. Like, he's listed as a tackle right now. Like, if he's not dominating inside, then why is he, like, the best player of his position there, right? That's what it's supposed to be, and it's just really not at the moment, I feel.
Hard to argue against putting Ty Pham first team because he was phenomenal this year. So, absolutely. I guess we'll move on to Zach now. Zach, who's your main pick for Come On Man?
My top pick is going to come from the OUA as well, and it's going to be Frank Renaud of Windsor, linebacker. He had an outstanding season. His teammate, Akeem Wonder, was a second-team All-Star selection, but Frank Renaud was left out of the first and second-team picks, which just baffles me. He had 52 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles, and 4 pass breakups. If that's not a versatile player, I don't know what is. And he got left off both lists. I'd easily put him ahead of Sabrin on the first team, who missed a couple games, didn't have the All-Star season he had last year. And even on the second team, I'd put him ahead of even Isho. Isho is a big name, but Frank Renaud's stats speak for themselves. He is a versatile player that, only in his second year and he gets the job done. He got really snubbed this year, and come on, man. Come on.
For my pick, I have 4 selections of mine, and none of them are really that terrible, but I think I have to speak up for all of these players, and I'll start off with Brandon Deschamps from Canada West. Now, I know you have to be crazy to argue against either Mercer Timmis or Anthony Coombs. Timmis led the country in rushing. He had 10 more touchdowns than the next closest running back for rushing touchdowns with 18, so you can't leave him off, obviously. Anthony Coombs is maybe the best all-around running back in the country. He was second in rushing, but, his receiving numbers are just way better than anybody else's. But it's so hard to see a guy like Deschamps left off. He was second in the country in ground yards per game, 143.9, which is right behind Timmis, 144.6. If he played one more game like Coombs did, he would have had more. I know the receiving numbers aren't there. I'm not arguing against Timmis or Coombs, but I'm saying Deschamps is definitely a guy who is an all-star, and just to see him left off an all-star team is a little disheartening. Something that concerns me a little more is the OUA wide receiver selections, which is something that I wrote an article on previously, and I knew that there would be people left off because some people had great seasons, and 2 of the people that I mentioned were Saxon Lindsay of Guelph and Alex Prechalski of U of T. Luckily, Prechalski got selected, but Saxon Lindsay was left off, and if you look at his numbers, they're better, as usually is the case with this, than a lot of other guys, but it comes down to reputation, I think. Saxon Lindsay, 44 catches, 515 yards, 6 touchdowns, and he's a fifth-year guy. He played on a Guelph team that won 7-1. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. It's a little disheartening to see a guy, and I don't want to call anyone out. You know what I mean? I know Giovanni Aquile is a great receiver, and he does more than what the numbers simply say. But if you compare the numbers, side by side, and you look at them, it seems like Saxon Lindsay was a bit snubbed. And also, I want to say both Ottawa receivers, Andrew Mullings and Nicholas Dagger, didn't get enough love. Another interesting thing is Anapolsky not being a first-team receiver, even though he set the record for catches in a year. I know the Pass, Johnson, Marshall, and Pashanik, are all deserving, but, that one's a little tough to see. And then finally, the last 2, James Tuck, who was among the league leaders in tackles for loss and tackle for loss yards, and he had a lot of tackles, led the team in tackles. For a guy who plays on the D-line is just phenomenal. That guy gets overlooked all year long, so I think he should have gotten some love there. And then finally, Billy McPhee, who I think admonished any demons he may have had. I think he had a phenomenal year. Colbin is very deserving for second team. Obviously, Finch is like a no-brainer. But I do feel like if you look at the numbers, if you look at McPhee, you see that he had 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 266 yards a game. I think he's more than worthy, and then leading Queens to 7-1 record.
Right. My last one is Dylan Campbell, running back for the Golden Hawks, getting snubbed as second team in favor of running back Earl Brooks, who plays for York. Brooks averaged 87 yards a game, finished with 700 yards with 4 touchdowns. Dylan Campbell averaged 109 yards a game, 867 yards, 5 touchdowns, and had a 100-yard run against Western. I understand maybe Brooks didn't have an all-star offensive line in front of him, but I think Dylan Campbell deserves a bit more respect than he's getting at the moment.
I'm going to have to add a couple more come on man selections here. I'm going to head over to the RSEQ. It's my home conference. Pascal Lochard, he was apparently the clear-cut winner for the all-star selection at running back. But I think he should have been one of the outside picks. I don't see how Luis Guimond Motel McGill was not the clear-cut all-star in this selection. He had over 100 yards a game for a team that usually does not have a reputation for running the ball. He had over 800 yards as well, and I just think he made a name for himself this year. He has the stats to prove it, and he showed how much of a hard-nosed running back he really is and deserves that clear-cut nomination. And then going back to the Canada West, we see a tie at QB for the all-star selection between Andrew Buckley and Jordan Yance. I think Buckley's season was impressive, but I think Jordan Yance is just a clear-cut all-star here as well. He should have been the only selection. His numbers are just too impressive. You look at them, over 300 yards a game, 25 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. That is very impressive. He led the CIS in touchdowns this year, and I think he deserved that selection just for himself.
Do you have anyone else for us, Pat?
I think that's it, James.
Okay, well, that certainly leaves a mouthful. That's a lot to digest in a little bit of time. I mean, and it's the case every year where you can't make everyone happy. There's always going to be guys who are deserving and they're left off the list. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to put in veterans who have put in their work and have had a great year and would have had better numbers if they played more games or if they were used more in the offense. But it's just interesting, to give credit to the guys who probably, deserve to make the team and then just didn't get the opportunity to do so. So, and what's that? Okay, we go over to Zach for one more comment here.
We've been talking about a lot of come on men, but I just want to give a shout out to the Queens defensive backcourt. They had 3 first team defensive players in TJ Chase, Yan Baltoken, and Andrew Liu, and I think they're all very deserving of those selections. And it just shows how good that secondary is, and I'm excited to see them play against Western.
That's going to be phenomenal. Will Finch, potential Heck Crichton winner against 3 OUA All-Stars at DBN, potentially all Canadians too. So what more can you ask for, right? Well, everyone, that's all the time we have here on the SportsEh CIS Roundup. Make sure to check out sportseh.ca for up-to-the-minute news and opinion on CIS and high school sports. We'll be back next week for the UTEC and Mitchell Bowl results and all the news surrounding the Vanier Cup matchup in Quebec. We'll also be talking to players and coaches in the CIS about their season and their chances for next year. I've been your host, James Katsuras, joined by Zach Miller and Pat Yan. And as always, tune in next week